flight through the sky suddenly became a battleground of intense conflicts and unexpected revelations. A spectacle that would make anyone shudder. I had never thought that a domestic flight from New York to Los Angeles could unfold as a stage revealing tangled lives and dark secrets, where ego and power turned into weapons that shattered the peace of an entire journey. I remember clearly the moment I stepped onto the plane that day. The cold air of the New York airport terminal gave no indication of the chaos that was about to unfold. As someone who frequently traveled for work, I was used to crowded flights, but I never imagined that this time, everything would be so different. When I found my window seat, a spot I always preferred to admire the view outside, I had no idea that fate was about to send me an unexpected challenge. From the very first minutes, there was a subtle yet unmistakable shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Curious glances were directed toward the front, where a middle-aged woman stood in the aisle, her face tense, her eyes sharp as a knife. That was Karen, a name I would never forget. Karen was not only known for her stylish appearance but also for her arrogance, her unwavering sense of entitlement, and her belief that she deserved privileges beyond common rules. In that moment, I sensed that beneath her polished exterior was a person devoid of humility, convinced that she belonged to the entitled class. Karen appeared like a storm in the quiet space of the flight. She strode toward me with an unsettling confidence, her voice cold and firm as she demanded that I give up my window seat for her son. A child raised under the special request philosophy, as if merely being Karen's child meant everything had to go his way. Although a window seat was just a seat, in that moment, it became a symbol of power and social hierarchy, of a world where special guests were always put first. As I tried to comprehend the unexpected situation, Karen left no room for negotiation. She spoke in a cold, sharp tone. "This seat is for my son. Can you give it up right now?" Her words cut through the air like daggers, making me feel an unsettling tremor inside. While I had deliberately chosen the window seat for my own comfort, I couldn't deny the flicker of hesitation that arose in my mind in the face of Karen's unrelenting assertiveness. The tension in the cabin grew as surrounding passengers started to take notice and whisper among themselves. Curious eyes, hushed murmurs. It all indicated that the situation was escalating into an unspoken battle between two sides. On one, a calm traveler who believed in fairness and shared rules. On the other, Karen, the embodiment of an unyielding ego and personal privilege. In that moment, I felt the weight of the situation. Not just a simple dispute over a seat, but a clash of moral values, a confrontation between kindness and selfishness. I recalled lessons about compassion and mutual respect, but in the presence of Karen, those principles seemed to blur. She wasn't just demanding a seat, she was demanding recognition, an unquestionable priority justified solely by her child's existence. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder about Karen's circumstances. Despite her outward display of dominance, perhaps she, too, was burdened by societal pressures and complex personal relationships, forcing her to wear the mask of superiority. In her sharp gaze, I sensed an underlying insecurity, a fear of being overlooked, that had transformed into an insatiable need to assert herself by imposing on others. At that moment, Karen's son, a boy with innocent yet haughty eyes, stood beside her, embodying his mother's influence. Though just a child, he had already learned that being the offspring of someone powerful meant everything should bend to his will. His presence intensified the atmosphere, as if the entire cabin had turned into a stage for a dark drama in which every passenger played an inescapable role. Faced with this confrontation, I remained firm. I wasn't someone who easily yielded to unfair demands, but I also didn't want to disrupt the flight's fragile peace. I calmly explained that seat assignments were determined by the airline's policy and that switching seats would cause inconvenience to other passengers. However, in Karen's eyes, my words were mere flickers of light in the overwhelming darkness of her entitlement. The tension rippled through the cabin like waves, filling every corner of the confined space. Passengers, unable to look away, watched the unfolding conflict between Karen and me. Some remained silent, while others exchanged intrigued glances. It felt as though everything had been placed on a scale, awaiting a decision or action that would shift the balance of the entire situation. At that moment, This wasn't merely a dispute over a seat. It was a test of human values, a revelation of modern societal dynamics hidden beneath the actions of those involved. As I sat there, both anxious and astonished, a strange realization dawned upon me. This was only the beginning of a series of unexpected events. I didn't yet know that what happened next would take this confrontation to another level, unveiling twists no one had anticipated. Perhaps what occurred on that flight was a brutal reminder that in life, the truth isn't always apparent at first glance, and that every person, regardless of who they are, carries hidden shadows within them. With each passing second, the air grew heavier, as if the tension itself had seeped into the very fabric of the cabin. My heartbeat quickened, synchronized with the anxious breaths of those around me. My trip, which had started as a simple business flight, had now become a living drama, an unpredictable spectacle that no one could have foreseen. And in that moment, I understood that even in the vast land of America, where freedom and fairness are celebrated, biases, distorted egos, and class divides still lurk beneath the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. That was the first time I truly realized that every flight, every person we encounter, carries a story. Stories full of contradictions, bitterness, and raw truth. And in that moment, my journey took on a deeper, more profound meaning, as each encounter revealed new reflections on the value of respect and compassion in modern life. As soon as Karen approached my seat with a cold and determined voice, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from normal to unbearably tense. She stood there, exuding a challenging confidence, adamantly declaring that the window seat I was occupying was her son's natural right. Every word she uttered ignited sparks, fueling an inevitable conflict. Karen left no room for compromise. She stepped closer, her gaze as sharp as a blade, and said, "This seat belongs to my son. You need to give it up right now because he deserves the window seat." Her voice echoed through the cabin, making the already confined space feel even more suffocating. I tried to remain calm, though frustration rose inside me at the absurdity of being forced into such an unreasonable situation. I responded gently, maintaining a warm yet firm tone. "Sorry, Karen, but the seats are assigned randomly according to airline policy. Changing seats could disrupt the comfort of other passengers." But in Karen's eyes, my words were nothing more than meaningless noise, incapable of shaking her unwavering determination. Immediately, Karen's voice grew louder, her demands becoming more intense and aggressive. "You do not get to refuse me. My son is a child of importance, and you will give up that seat for him now." Her words struck the air like relentless punches, making some passengers around us lower their heads in fear of her escalating outburst. At that moment, I felt a palpable shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Curious glances, uneasy movements. Other passengers were becoming increasingly aware of the brewing tension. Some whispered discreetly among themselves, while others seemed to be looking for flight attendants to intervene. The tension erupted like stormy waves, carrying with it an overwhelming sense of injustice and entitlement. Karen, with a face that refused to back down, gestured sharply to emphasize every word. She stepped even closer, her piercing eyes drilling into me as if to crush any resistance. "I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. This isn't just a seat. It's about respect for people like me." Her words made the tension explode further. I tried to stay composed, but deep inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of unfairness. Why was another passenger's right being disregarded simply because of personal privilege? Meanwhile, the murmurs among nearby passengers only highlighted the growing divide between the privileged and the ordinary. A middle-aged woman near the aisle whispered to her companion, "Unbelievable. She's acting like she's the queen of this plane." That quiet remark spread, planting seeds of discontent, further intensifying the rift between different social perspectives. Despite the tension and Karen's sharp words, I continued to explain calmly and politely. "Karen, if you truly believe this seat belongs to your son, you can speak with the flight crew for assistance. However, airline regulations ensure all passengers are fairly assigned their seats." Yet, my words only seemed to enrage her further. Karen snapped back, her voice seething with fury. You don't understand anything. In my world, things go my way. If you don't move, you will regret it. Her words were not just a threat to me. They sent a ripple of unease throughout the cabin. Some passengers turned to watch, while others discreetly raised their phones to record the unfolding drama. The conflict had escalated beyond control, like a sudden storm shattering the boundaries of politeness and mutual respect. Amidst the chaos, a middle-aged man stood up from a few rows behind and said, "Excuse me, but I think we all need to calm down. This is a flight, not a battlefield for power struggles." His words rang like an alarm bell, but within moments, Karen's anger only intensified. She pointed at him aggressively, as if attempting to expel him from the plane. She shouted, "Do you not care about my son's rights? You're just interfering and ruining this flight for everyone." Her words solidified the divide among passengers. Some sided with me, recognizing my right to my assigned seat, while others sympathized with Karen, believing she was merely protecting her child's interests. I felt my heart race, each passing second adding invisible pressure to this seemingly endless confrontation. In that moment, I wondered, how could one irrational demand turn a peaceful flight into a stage for class struggles and blatant injustice? I searched for an explanation, but reason seemed to have been swept away by Karen's storm of entitlement. The tension thickened as Karen's voice continued to dominate the cabin, not just demanding a seat, but making proclamations about power and privilege. She declared, "In this society, parental authority must be respected. Do you really think you have the right to refuse me?" Her words were like sharp needles, piercing through the air, laced with arrogance and entitlement, leaving the surrounding passengers both shocked and unsettled. Some even began to speculate whether her actions were a reflection of a distorted mindset or simply an unrealistic demand in today's world. As the confrontation neared its breaking point, an overwhelming silence momentarily engulfed the cabin, amplifying the unease. Every passenger seemed to be holding their breath, anticipating a final move, a decisive action or statement that would determine the outcome of this escalating conflict. I tried to remain neutral, but deep inside, I felt the frustration of watching personal power being placed above reason and fairness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of prolonged tension, the atmosphere in the cabin seemed to freeze, awaiting the next development. Karen, her face flushed with fury, turned to me and spoke with an unmistakable challenge in her voice. "You will regret not obeying me. You'll soon learn that in life, power isn't distributed as fairly as you think." Her words echoed through the space, like an ominous prediction of an even more dramatic confrontation to come. In that moment, I realized that while I had only wanted to maintain order and fairness, this conflict had transcended a simple seat dispute. It had become a stark representation of a society where human values were overshadowed by self-importance and entitlement. Each of us, regardless of our status, has limits to our patience and tolerance. And at that moment, all of those limits were being tested. Looking around, I saw more than just surprise on passengers' faces. I saw fear. Some glanced at each other anxiously, wondering how far this battle would go and whether a resolution was even possible. The air had grown so heavy that every word, every movement, carried an unsettling weight of tension and uncertainty. At last, as everything remained suspended in a thick atmosphere of pressure, I realized this was the moment when people had to choose between silent submission or the courage to stand up for what was right. No matter how difficult the road ahead might be, I knew that silence would not solve the problem. Only direct confrontation could restore order and fairness among those sharing this flight. The heated exchange between Karen and me was no longer just about a seat. It was a manifestation of the deeper conflicts within human nature, the battle between self-interest and collective values. And at that moment, amid the booming voice of entitlement and the anxious gazes of those around me, I understood that sometimes, to protect what is right, one must have the courage to stand firm, no matter how powerful or demanding the opponent may be. At the peak of the tension, as screams echoed like lightning bolts through the confined space of the cabin, everything seemed to have spiraled beyond control. Karen, her face flushed red and her eyes blazing with fury, became even more aggressive in her demands, refusing to accept any form of denial from me. She stepped forward, each footfall heavy with anger, and threatened, "You'll regret it if you don't give up your seat for my child right now." A declaration that sent tremors through the airplane, synchronized with the fearful pounding of hearts. Karen's outburst not only triggered my personal resistance but also ignited a wave of reactions from the surrounding passengers. Every gaze turned toward us, from those who simply wished for a peaceful flight to those who couldn't look away from the unfolding drama. The tension was so thick that each breath felt burdened with unspoken curses and silent threats. Amid Karen's raging storm, a middle-aged man appeared from behind. His stern face, sharp eyes, and steady stance, reminiscent of a former police officer, instantly shifted the atmosphere. He approached me, firmly gripping his sleeve, and spoke in a calm yet authoritative tone. "Allow me to say something. We all have the right to be treated fairly. Let's abide by the airline's regulations, not the whims of an individual." His unexpected intervention was like a firecracker in the midst of gloom. The murmurs across the cabin fell silent, giving way to his commanding words, and it seemed as though everyone paused to listen. Karen, realizing that not just I, but now a third party was standing up for fairness, momentarily lost her initial confidence. She took a step back, but almost immediately, she swung back to indignation, her eyes flashing like a brewing storm. Karen's voice rang out, "You don't need to interfere. I know exactly what my rights are. My child is the top priority." Her words only escalated the tension, as the middle-aged man responded, "Everyone's rights must be respected, Karen. And if you have something to address, you should take it up with the proper authorities, not force other passengers to comply with your demands." His response was like a wake-up call, stirring hushed conversations among the passengers. A sense of unease spread throughout the cabin, as the atmosphere teetered on the brink of an unavoidable confrontation, one between those who stood for fairness and those who insisted on their own version of privilege. Just as the situation reached a boiling point, an unexpected turn of events made it even more intense. The middle-aged man, his face serious, suddenly posed a question. "Karen, do you realize? There's a lot about your past that we don't know." His words struck like a hammer, and for a moment, the air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Karen's expression shifted from furious red to a mix of fear and anxiety. What? I don't understand what you mean," she stammered, her voice trembling, though she struggled to maintain a facade of resilience. The man continued, "The truth is, not everyone knows that you have a very dark past. You have used your power and influence to manipulate and harm innocent people, even within your own family." His statement hit like a lightning strike, shocking everyone in the cabin. Gasps and hurried whispers spread like wildfire, and even Karen, for the first time, seemed at a loss for words, realizing that a secret she had tried to keep buried was now being exposed before an entire plane full of passengers. The revelations tore through the layers of pride and authority Karen had built around herself. The middle-aged man went on, "You were once known as one of the most powerful figures in business, but behind that success you left behind a trail of scandals that still haunt many families. You exploited your position to intimidate, threaten, and even harm those who couldn't defend themselves." His words rang through the cabin like a public indictment. Each sentence chipped away at Karen's once unshakable reputation. The passengers' expressions shifted from curiosity to outrage, and the atmosphere grew heavier by the second. Karen struggled to maintain her composure, trying to hide her dark past with excuses. "That was a long time ago, and I've paid for my mistakes. I shouldn't be judged by my past." But her defense only made things worse. The middle-aged man remained firm. "Your past cannot be erased by mere apologies. Your actions caused irreversible harm to many, and now you must face the consequences." Shock rippled through the cabin. Some passengers pulled out their phones to record the unfolding confrontation, the air thick with unease, labored breaths, hushed murmurs. It was clear that everyone could feel the weight of the moment. Karen, now looking shattered, no longer had the strength to keep fighting. But instead of accepting defeat, she resorted to threats. "If you think you can ruin my reputation with just a few words, you're mistaken. I won't let anyone, no matter who they are. Tear down my power. Her defiant words sounded like the desperate final stand of someone who knew they had lost. But to most of the passengers, they only solidified the dark truth about Karen's past. Voices of agreement and discontent began to rise among the crowd, a mix of condemnation and sympathy for her past victims. Some passengers even teared up, recalling stories they had heard about powerful figures abusing their influence. The discussions and nodding heads signaled a collective realization. This wasn't just a dispute over a seat. It was a moment of reckoning, exposing the hidden injustices within a society where status and privilege could overshadow basic human decency. As Karen clung to the last shreds of her reputation, the middle-aged man delivered a final, unyielding statement. Power is not meant to be abused. It must come with responsibility and respect for others. And Karen, you can no longer escape the truth about yourself. His words hung like a sword, poised to sever the link between Karen's past and present. The cabin felt heavier than ever, and the unwavering gazes of the passengers left Karen flustered and lost. Just as the tension reached its peak, a loud alert from the flight crew signaled the need for official intervention. But before anyone could act, Karen suddenly lowered her head, as if realizing that all the control she once wielded had crumbled. The secret she had desperately hidden was now exposed, leaving her with nowhere to turn. The revelations about Karen's dark past sparked debates not only within the cabin but also across social media shortly after the flight. People discussed, shared, and condemned her behavior, witnesses and outsiders alike. This incident became a symbol of injustice, a reminder of how power and status could blur the lines of truth and dignity. In that moment, though the tension had yet to fully dissipate, one thing was certain: no one would ever look at Karen the same way again. She had become the embodiment of power abuse, and at the same time, a stark warning that no matter how deeply a truth is buried, it will always find a way to surface. The climax of that flight wasn't just about a seat dispute. It had become a psychological battle, a moral reckoning where values of justice and humanity were put to the test. Every word, every action carried a message: that power without accountability is never sustainable. And in that moment of harsh revelation, as Karen's past was laid bare, every passenger, no matter where they sat on the plane, knew they were witnessing a turning point, one where fairness and dignity triumphed over entitlement and privilege. The final moments of the confrontation were etched into the minds of all aboard, a powerful reminder that in today's world, no one can exploit their power without consequences. And though Karen had tried everything to bury her past, in the end, the truth prevailed. And once it did, there was no way to undo the fate she had brought upon herself. In the moments following the revelation of the truth, the atmosphere in the cabin seemed frozen, and everyone could feel the psychological storm brewing. After the accusations about Karen's dark past were made, the confrontation between her and the middle-aged man gradually shifted to the inevitable consequences. The flight crew and security personnel quickly intervened, acting as a lifeline just when everything seemed on the verge of spiraling out of control. Immediately, the stern-faced flight captain stepped forward, firmly demanding that Karen stop her behavior at once. "Karen, please calm down. We do not allow passengers to cause disturbances on this flight." The captain's voice rang out, clear and decisive. Under the pressure of official authority, Karen, with uncertain eyes and a panicked expression, had no choice but to comply. She stood still, unsure of how to respond when every eye in the cabin was fixed on her. As Karen hesitated, the middle-aged man, the one who had dared to speak up and expose the secrets she had been trying to hide, bowed his head slightly, as if he understood that justice does not resolve itself immediately but requires time and the right process. At this point, the flight crew instructed Karen to return to her assigned seat and warned her that if she continued to cause trouble, she would face penalties in accordance with airline regulations and might even be reported to the authorities after the flight. The crew's intervention was not just an immediate solution, but also a reminder to all passengers that personal power cannot override common order and regulations. The atmosphere in the cabin gradually returned to order, though there remained an undercurrent of tension, an oppressive weight of emotions that had surged through the crowd. Passengers, from those seated near the aisle to those in the back, followed every development with a mix of shock and disbelief. Soon after the incident, several passengers' phones and cameras lit up, capturing the intense confrontation. On social media, the story spread rapidly with hundreds, even thousands of shares and comments. Karen, the woman who once saw herself as a symbol of power, was now being portrayed as a tyrant, someone who abused her influence for personal gain. Short video clips showing the moment she was ordered back to her seat, accompanied by the accusations from the middle-aged man, became an online sensation, sparking a heated debate about ethics, power, and fairness in modern society. After the plane landed, authorities at the airport promptly questioned Karen about her behavior during the flight. Initial reports suggested that her actions not only violated airline regulations but might also be linked to past misconduct. The exposure of her personal secrets triggered a more extensive investigation, not only by passengers who had witnessed the event but also by journalists and social experts. On forums and news sites, conflicting opinions emerged. Some argued that Karen was merely a victim of societal pressure, while others condemned her for her authoritarian behavior, seeing it as a symptom of a privileged class that was eroding equality in American society. The incident did not end there. Rumors quickly spread that Karen had been temporarily detained for further investigation. While some witnesses claimed that her actions had severely damaged both her personal reputation and career, social behavior experts immediately weighed in, analyzing the situation as a consequence of a society where arrogance and abuse of power can lead to unpredictable consequences. In today's era, where every individual has the freedom to speak on social media, a minor incident on a flight can be amplified to the point where the entire society is forced to reflect. One expert commented, suggesting that this event served as a warning for those who see themselves as entitled. In the aftermath of the incident, the airport remained abuzz with interviews, debates, and emergency press conferences from the airline. As the storyteller myself, having gone through an emotional whirlwind during the flight, I found myself exhausted as I absorbed the countless reactions from those around me. I realized that, even though I was just an ordinary passenger, witnessing the downfall of a self-proclaimed authority had given me a deeper appreciation for justice and mutual respect. Other passengers, who initially felt fear and anxiety, gradually expressed their support and encouragement, witnessing the professionalism of the flight crew and security personnel. Many of them voiced their belief that Karen's behavior was merely representative of a small group in modern society, those who assume they are more entitled than others and believe they can exploit their position to achieve personal goals. Some even began sharing similar stories, experiences of being overpowered by people who abused their authority, leaving them feeling powerless and oppressed. During interviews after the flight, I was asked about my emotions while witnessing such an intense confrontation. I shared that, although my initial goal was simply to protect my own rights and maintain order, the event had made me realize that every action we take can have a profound impact on the community. We live in a society where everything is measured through the lens of fairness and respect. When an individual uses their power to oppress others, it's not just that person who suffers the consequences. Society as a whole is affected, I said, my voice contemplative yet firm. The conclusion of that flight was not just the end of an airborne confrontation, but the beginning of a new awareness for many people. The event became a vivid lesson for those who believed that personal privilege could override common rules. It served as a reminder that, regardless of where we are, whether in the skies or on the ground, every action must be accountable to society, and everyone deserves to be treated with fairness. The next day, as news of the incident spread across various media outlets, discussions and forums emerged to explore ethical values in modern life. People debated how arrogance and the abuse of power could inflict lasting wounds on communities, and how society needed to foster an environment where every individual felt respected and equal. Although this lesson stemmed from an incident on a flight, it painted a much larger picture of the societal issues unfolding in the US and across the world. For me, the story left many lingering thoughts. I realized that in life, the truth cannot always remain hidden, and that even seemingly insignificant acts of tyranny can lead to serious consequences. The confrontation between Karen and me, along with the intervention of honest and dedicated individuals, proved that justice and human dignity always have a way of prevailing, no matter how dominant injustice may appear at times. Looking back on the entire event, I felt both reflective and hopeful. hopeful that, despite the inequalities and prejudices in modern society, there will always be those who stand up for truth and humanity. The actions of the flight crew, the middle-aged man who dared to speak up, and the passengers who condemned the abuse of power demonstrated that each of us has the ability to change the status quo. Ultimately, that flight, despite its tense moments, became a vivid depiction of the struggle between personal ego and collective values. The consequences of the confrontation extended beyond Karen being held accountable for her actions. They sparked a broader conversation about justice, dignity, and the importance of mutual respect in all circumstances. And for me, it was a valuable lesson. A reminder that courage and persistence are the most powerful weapons against any form of injustice. With everything that transpired, the passengers on that flight, each with their own story, carried with them a newfound belief that justice, even when tested, will always prevail, and that truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always find a way to rise and illuminate the shadows of prejudice and injustice.